So on this fifth night of Hanukkah, I wanted to talk about Hanukkah as if it is something that's part of our lives, um, and not just the electric candles in the living room. And I think this year, for many of us, it's been not that hard to do that, obviously, because we feel the darkness around us. I think one of the things that we're discovering is that the there the period between 1939 and 2025, well, they're connected. And we forgot we were in Jewish history, and Hanukkah now especially is a way of remembering it. And there's a particular kind of anti-Semitism that we see in the Greek attack on the Jews, which distinguishes it from others. So just to start out with, there are, as you know, four kingdoms. This is from a verse in Daniel. First is Persia, and that the Megillat Esther story happens during that. And there's Babylonia, Bavel, and then there's Yavan, Greece, and then Edom or Rome. They're categories. So Yavan had a particular way of undermining the Jews. There are two kinds of like anti-Semitism. I'm going to see if I can do a share screen here. Always challenging. So there are different kinds of anti-Semitism, and this one is called the replacement anti-Semitism. And you see this is in Charlottesville in 2017. The lady doth protest too much. Jews will not replace us. We already have replaced you. And that's a story that's consistent with the exiles, the other exiles. For example, when Rome moves Israel or puts Israel into its last exile, the capital of Jerusalem becomes a holy place for Catholics. They replace us. They take that part. That's an older kind of it's an anti-Semitism that's repeated here as well. Here's the angry white men. But the anti-Semitism we're talking about today is a little bit different. I mean, in fact, it's very different, and it goes back to the Greeks. And I'm showing you this image of the Chicago Dyke March in 2017, just as a kind of introduction to what we'll see with the Greeks. In 2017, there is a march, a Dyke March. Got it? So the Jews show up, Zionists, Jews, Zionists, and they are excluded. So why is that? Why is it that the celebration of difference always excludes the Jew? And the answer is because that celebration of difference is a celebration of every difference but the Jew. The Jew remains the one thing on the outside against which all the particularisms define themselves, the universalism. What I mean by take all of the intersectional groups and you group them together, and they're all different, but one thing that they agree on is the Jew is on the outside. Now, this has a very, very old provenance. Here's another image. The Moshava truck was in the Philadelphia Food Festival because they served falafels in an act of incredible culinary imperialism or whatever. So they're also not allowed. So again, the intersectional alliance always excludes the Jews because that's its basis. And as I was saying, it's got a very old provenance here. This is from Galatians, Paul's letter to the Galatians. And he says there is neither Jew nor Greek, Grecian in the Hebrew Bible. There is neither bond nor free. There is neither male nor female, for you are all one in Christ Jesus. It's very beautiful. I mean, this universalist expression, but the problem is it's much better for the Greek than it is for the Jew, because the Greek is the universal. The Jew remains the particular. So this is really a statement about erasure. And when we talk about Hanukkah, and what was characteristic about the Greek exile, we'll talk about three things. One is the ways in which the Greek attack on Jewish practice, and then the Greek attack or the Greek appropriation of the Jewish book. And then we'll talk a little bit about the contamination of the oil. Now, the Greeks were you first of all, the Greeks we're talking about were not Plato and Aristotle, which is interesting because like the art scroll industry, the Torah publishing industry has created a liturgy which seems to suggest, in fact, that it is the same. I look at their books. Um, Plato and Aristotle were 200 years before the Seleucids, who had enormous pieces of property. And like, you just look, I have a map over here. Where are the Seleucids? Well, I didn't add Seleucids, but they go to India essentially. And they based what their Hellenism on Greek philosophy, but it was a kind of universalism that was coercive. There you go. And that's kind of the university today, that kind of coercive universalism. What were the Greek attacks? So, what are the things that define the Jew? One way of saying it is, well, one thing that defines, well, here are the Greek attacks, and we'll see if if they work. So one is they forbade the practice of Brit Milah. The Brit Milah is an oath. It's a sign. It's a divine handprint on the person, on the body, male body. So they forbade that practice. Also, they forbade Shabbat, Ot, Beni. It is a sign again between the people of Israel and God. Another way in which there is an imprint of the divine in the human. And the third, most interestingly, I think, is the attack on the Jewish calendar. That is, they forbade the practice of declaring the new month. And there, the imprint, instead of being divine, this is the first mitzvah in the Torah, interestingly, and it is a mitzvah which the people of Israel perform. They make the time. When the new moon is declared, depending upon witnesses and testimony and judges, when that is declared, that is the new month. If they made a mistake, there is no mistake. They create that reality. So it's this combination of the divine and the human coming together to create time. So those things, those three things, the Greeks they forbade. And every year there's like an article in Haaretz about the real story of Hanukkah and how it just goes into all the geopolitical stuff. We basically learn the real story of Hanukkah. I mean, and that's part of what we have to understand about Hanukkah is it's not something that's the victory is not something that necessarily was obvious, but because of the shemen, that was like a siman, another oat, a sign. And when they saw that, they said, "Oh, this must have been a miracle." And from then on, they tell the story in its miraculous way. The miracle happened. The oil is really just a kind of perceptual lens through which to understand the military victory of the real story of Hanukkah. Um, so those three practices were undermined. Another thing, and here's another appropriation. Everybody talks about appropriation. Talk about appropriation, people. Everybody stole our book, and the Christians did it and erased us or tried to in the process. So this is also the time that the king, Ptolemy, requests a translation of the Jewish Bible, and he forces 70 of the Sanhedrin, the rabbis say, and they are all in different rooms, and they all come up with the exact same translation, and they're very careful in not misleading Greeks, and they make certain kinds of changes, and they're all consistent. This is viewed in the Jewish calendar, this active translation, the Septuagint, as something to fast over. It's the 10th day of Tevet that comes up in about 2 weeks after Hanukkah, or less than that. The 10th day of Tevet is a fast, and one of the reasons is for the fast is because of this translation. Now, what exactly is tragic about the translation? Of course, everything is lost in translation. That's one thing. But the translation turned the Jew an outsider to himself. That is the Torah that had a special place in the library. A special place in the library, meaning it speaks to me. Putting Torah and giving it a call number and putting it on the library shelf makes it equivalent with other sacred texts, right? It's in the sacred text part, the BR section of the Library of Congress. That's where you'll find all the sacred texts, the Quran, Jewish Bible, Christian Bible. And that in itself was what the Seleucid Hellenists wanted. They could not tolerate Jewish difference. Now, interestingly, the rabbis say that there's one language, they say from a verse in Genesis, there's one language that the Torah can be translated to, and that is, in fact, Greek. The Torah can be translated into Greek and into no other language. I'm not sure it's ever been done, but that's kind of the rabbinic acknowledgement of the greatness of Greek knowledge. And the rabbis do acknowledge the greatness of Greek knowledge. But the problem with the Greeks is that they can't accommodate a difference that can't be under their universalist agenda. So that's Jews. We're a problem. We're not doing that. We're not giving it up. And this is kind of, I think, oh, I wanted to mention also the contamination of the oil. And so the Maharal of Prague, he says that, or asked the question, well, why didn't they just destroy the oil? And the fact that they didn't, the Maharal says, tells you the Greeks were clever in their methods of appropriation. It tells you that all they had to do was touch it and contaminate it and render it impure. Because then whatever was distinctive about the oil, distinctively Jewish, distinctively holy, that would go away. And that's also a certain kind of Hellenism. And this is the internal exile of the Jew, where the Jew is no longer connected to her tradition, except as an outsider. That is, you're spectating, you are not inside. And this, I think, here, for me, what changed this year, I think, on Hanukkah is the understanding that we are on the inside, meaning we do feel the darkness. And what we do on Hanukkah is we see a light, and that light tells us that it's a direction. We just have to keep on going towards it. You know, our ancestors, they just didn't have time for theological controversies and for arguments about different kinds of minyanim. They didn't get involved in like debates of theology, debates between different movements. They were all they just wanted to survive. That's all they wanted to do. And Hanukkah is not just about faith. I'm learning the Slonim Rebbe, is not just about he lived through the Holocaust, is not just about the faith of the brain. And it's not just about the heart, but it's the faith of the body. It says that Hanukkah is the mitzvah where activity leads to creation. There's no other mitzvah like that. You maybe shake a lulav and esrog, but here, this is an activity that creates something. And the faith that you show and you have with your body, that is faith. And we misunderstand faith to be something that's spiritual. I mean, it is, but the spiritual, it's in in our world, we create it, and that's what Hanukkah is. It's the last of the holidays, and there's darkness, and we think temporally it's the last one. It's going into darkness now. What? And this is the thing about Jews. I sit in my shul on Shabbat on Friday night, Haredi shul, ultra Orthodox shul. I just love davening there. Um, there were like many different kinds of people, people with learning disabilities, who are people, and most of the people are like 80 years old or 90 years old. And you just have, I just the learning disabilities thing, meaning it's a very varied crowd and it's very porous. People come in and out. Um, it's an interesting form of community as non-community. I mean, I'm part of it, but I don't really know anybody there. But there's that sense. I know the 80-year-old rabbi who sits next to me, and we talk about the Parsha. And when we're singing Lecha Dodi to welcome the Shabbos, there is this sense, it's like we've just been doing this forever. We're just doing this forever and ever and ever and ever and ever. And Hanukkah is, and it's also, listen, this is what, for me, we're doing now with Writing on the Wall and Balagan, our magazine, is we're going back to ourselves. We're not looking outwards and arguing with people. We're going back to our tradition. It says in a Mishnah, the rabbis say that Moses comes up to God and says, can't we translate the oral law because we're going to forget it? And God says no, because I will not reveal my mysteries, and it uses the Greek word mysterion or something like that. It uses the Greek word, and it's basically saying to the Greeks who have the Septuagint, you have this written Torah, but you don't have oral Torah. And our oral Torah, of course, it's Talmud, but our oral Torah is Jewish life after the temple. Music, dancing, art, literature. That is our oral law. That is our oral Torah. And living that oral Torah, that's survival. Sometimes people say, poskim, Jewish halachic deciders, that minhagim are like halacha. Sometimes a community keeps a minhag, which is not it's not in the Torah, but they keep it long enough, it becomes like the Torah. That's the oral law inclusive. Oral Torah is inclusive of everything, and the Greeks don't get that. That's what we have. That's what we have, and that's what we have to go back to, and that's what we have to preserve, because it's very dark. And the light that we have is the light of our activity. Just your light, light the candles. You are in motion doing a mitzvah. You're bringing light into the world. Happy Hanukkah.